If you are wondering what story structure to use for your novel, then this is the video for you. We're going to start with the absolute worst story structures that you definitely shouldn't use, and then we're going to go all the way to the very best story structures. Let's start with the bottom of the barrel, the absolute worst one. Number 8. 3-act structure. This is known as the Sid Fields paradigm because he created it in his 1979 book, Screenplay: The Foundations of Screenwriting. I actually studied with him at USC. He was a great writer. He was a great teacher. Unfortunately, he died a few years back, which makes me feel less bad about putting this at the bottom. Sorry, Sid. The 3-act structure is very simple. It just has the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. Sid points out how movies like Jurassic Park follow this structure, and Shawshank Redemption, a lot of it follows this structure. And also movies like The Godfather follow this structure. And you're probably thinking like, okay, those are fantastic movies. What do you mean this is bottom of the barrel? I'm putting this at the very bottom, not because it doesn't work, but for two reasons. One, I think this is a format better suited for movies than it is for novels. Novels are a very different beast than movies, and what will work in a novel format might work better, say, in a short story format or something a little bit briefer, rather than a novel format which has a lot more space. And the second reason I don't recommend this story structure is it feels like the framework is just a little bit thin. A novel is a gigantic beast with a lot of different moving pieces, and I don't think the simplicity of this story structure fits the complexity of the novel. Look, in the end, it's perfectly fine to know and even to study the 3-act structure. I would just not recommend making it the bedrock of your novel. Now, the 7th worst story structure, which will leave you high and dry, is Freytag's Pyramid. The German novelist Gustav Freytag published his Techniques of the Drama in 1863. And this is what it looks like. It has 5 different sections. You might have seen it before. And I have to say, like, it's not the worst story structure to use. I would just have to say it could be a little bit misleading. Look at that high point in the middle. What do you think that is? A lot of writers would instinctually respond like, oh, that must be the climax. And then I'd say, well, okay, why is it happening in the middle? And this is a frequent confusion that writers have with the Freytag's Pyramid. That middle high point is actually the point of no return, not a climax. So everything's going up to this moment halfway through the story. There's a watershed moment and everything slides down after that. The second problem I have with the Freytag's Pyramid is that there is limited genre application. Freytag's Pyramid works really well for tragedies, say like Romeo and Juliet. So what's the high point of the pyramid for Romeo and Juliet? It's not what you think. It's not Romeo and Juliet both committing suicide. It is Tybalt killing Mercutio. That is the point of no return that causes all of the rest of the story's events. So if you understand the point of no return, and if you are writing a tragedy, then this might be the right story structure for you. Otherwise, I would skip it. If you want more help with your story structure, get my course, Write Your Best Novel. I talk about things like how to write your novel's blueprint, the 7 elements of a bestseller, and also how to escalate your plot in the middle. You can buy that course alone, or you can subscribe to all my courses with Bookfox Academy. The 6th in our list might not be the absolute worst, but it is also definitely nowhere near the top of the heap. It is Kisho Tenketsu. Go ahead, say it with me. Kisho Tenketsu. This is a Japanese story structure. In case you couldn't tell, it comes from the 1300s, so it has a very long pedigree. And it has 4 basic sections: the introduction, the development, the twist, and then the conclusion. And I have 3 points to say about this one. First of all, it is a fairly simplistic structure, kind of like number 8, the 3-act structure. Second, it's particularly well suited for an Eastern style storytelling. Chinese, Japanese, Korean. And this is because the story structure isn't based on conflict at all, and also because it doesn't require characters to change. Both of those I feel like are very foundational to Western storytelling, but it's not something that this story structure takes into account. And the third thing I want to say about this is a story structure that is best for anecdotes, for urban legends, and for jokes. I really don't think this is the best format if you were trying to write long-form storytelling. Okay, for this next one, we're starting to reach the middle of the pack. This is number 5, the Fichtean Curve. This story structure was created by John Gardner in his book, The Art of Fiction. And this was back in 1983. Now look at this image. I love this image. It's a beautiful encapsulation of how storytelling works. An escalating series of successes and setbacks. And one thing I like about this story structure is its flexibility. It can accommodate so many different types of stories out there. And honestly, for a lot of writers, especially writers writing their first book, just having a series of successes and setbacks with escalating stakes moving upwards towards a climax is going to get you like 90% of the way towards having a book that works on the page. So what are the drawbacks of the Fitchian curve? I'll point out two. One is predictability. If every single part of your novel is kind of about the same length and includes a success and then another setback, it can start to feel a little bit routine and a little bit mundane. And you can partially avoid that by having, say, 2 setbacks in a row rather than always following a success setback format. And the other drawback can be pacing. You have to make sure that some sections are a little bit longer, some sections are a little bit shorter, so it doesn't feel like you're just doing the same exact thing again and again and again in the story. Okay, we're really warming up now. We are getting better. We are getting stronger. I hope you're still looking forward to that number 1 and number 2 slots. But for right now, we're looking at the number 4 slot, the snowflake method. Randy Ingermanson came up with the snowflake method, and it's basically an expanding complexity system. You start with a sentence description of the book, then expand to a paragraph description, then expand to a page description, then start to build out all your characters, then start to build out the framework of every single chapter. And what I appreciate about this method is that it's wildly different from a lot of these other structures that we're looking at. It feels very organic to start with a kernel of something and then build on that kernel in complexity until you reach enough of an outline or structure that you can write the book. Another great thing about this is there's a lot of latitude for variation. There's a lot less hand-holding from the structure telling you here's where you do this, here's where you do this, and a lot more of possibility of like, where do you want the story to go? If that's something that appeals to you, then this might be the best structure for you to follow. Another great thing about the snowflake method is that it's a very character-centric process. Some of the ones that we've looked at in this video already tend to be like 100% plot, like almost characters are an afterthought. While this one, characters are really integrated into the process of story building because you should pay attention to what your characters are going to do. That often gives you the clue of what your plot should be. Really, the only drawback to the snowflake method is that it doesn't really have any guardrails or guidelines. It's very much open-ended. Okay, now we're getting ready for our top 3 story structures. Let's look at number 3, Save the Cat. Save the Cat was created by Blake Snyder, and it really was a 15-point structure created for screenplays, but then later on adapted for novels. Now, I'm not going to go through all 15 steps. Honestly, that would take an entire video on its own, but I will point out 2 steps in this process that I've personally found very helpful when editing other people's books. The first one is where to introduce the B story, otherwise known as the subplot. In Save the Cat, this is step number 7, and I think you could be forgiven for thinking as a writer, like, don't I want to start my subplot earlier than that? But I actually think this is the right place to do it. You really do have to set up the main plot and get that all going before you can bridge into a secondary subplot. And the second thing that I found just really helpful about Save the Cat is these 2 points. All is lost and Dark Night of the Soul. These are the very lowest points in the hero's journey, and it usually happens just before the climax. Now, I used to think about this story point as a singular event, but I think the division into 2 is helpful. All is lost is an event, a very terrible event that happens to your hero, while Dark Night of the Soul is the hero's reaction, emotional reaction to that event. But overall, the principle of trying to make everything in your story be as terrible as possible right before the climax is an excellent, excellent move. And if you are skipping it, you are really hamstringing some of your story's power, because the climax isn't going to seem as great if you don't have that super awful period preceding it. Now, what are the downsides of Save the Cat? I think I have mentioned in other videos that I find it pretty prescriptive. The whole idea of, on page 59 do this, on 67 do this, it's just a little too much for me. So my recommendation is to follow this like a cook rather than a baker. A baker follows every single instruction to a T. You got to measure out every single ingredient. You can't skip everything. You really have to be precise. A cook, on the other hand, can throw in extra stuff. They don't have to measure, but, more do it by feel. So it's fine to use Save the Cat, but feel free to improvise around it and don't follow it super rigidly. We only have 2 story structures left, but these are our 2 very best. Let's look at number 2, 7-point story structure. Dan Wells came up with this, and it is a system of plot points and pinches. It's a very beautiful structure, it's a simple structure, and in some ways it's reminiscent of the Fitchian curve, which we looked at for number 5. But what I like about this structure is that there's a very clear distinction between the plot points and the plot pinches. And I think if you understand the difference between these two, it will really help you as you structure your book. A pinch is an outside event that happens to your character, while a plot point is action that your character takes in response to that. So let's look at Star Wars. A pinch would be when Princess Leia asks for help, and then Luke discovers that his entire family has been slaughtered. The plot point would be when Luke teams up with Han Solo to rescue Leia. The second pinch would be when Darth Vader kills Obi-Wan Kenobi, while the second plot point would be when Luke destroys the Death Star. Honestly, just using an escalating series of plot points and pinches can go a really long ways in helping you understand the basic framework of your novel. And now it's time for number 1, the one you've all been waiting for, the very top one in my rankings of story structures. Without further ado, I give to you number 1, the hero's journey. This is Joseph Campbell's 17-stage story structure. And you might say like, oh, that's the obvious choice, John. Yeah, but it works. Now, we don't have time to go into all 17 of these stages, but I'm just gonna point out the 6 that I find the most helpful when you're writing your novel. Let me just point out one step in the hero's journey that I have used and pointed out to writers about their manuscripts more than anything else in this entire video. It's the step of refusing the call. This is when the hero gets called to a journey. There's a step that before they accept the journey and go on the journey, they have to refuse the call. There needs to be resistance. And I have seen hundreds of stories that just have the hero go, all right, let's do this. And I'm like, no. That doesn't work psychologically. That doesn't work in terms of the monomyth. You need to take a moment and have the hero think like, ooh, do I want to do this? Like, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Maybe someone else can do it. If you don't have that step, your whole story comes off as being a little too cheesy and a little bit too easy. I also really like the concept of the belly of the whale in the hero's journey. This is when the hero has just started out on their journey and there's an immediate descent, meaning there's an immediate problem that they have to overcome. And if we could go back to Star Wars for a moment, a great example of this is when Han and Luke and Leia are stuck in the trash compactor. I mean, for one, this is not even metaphorically a belly of the beast. It's kind of like a mechanical belly of the beast. But this really is like sort of the huge problem that they very first encounter in their effort to rescue Princess Leia. The third thing which is really helpful in the hero's journey is the road of trials. The road of trials is just an escalating series of obstacles. And just this single step in the hero's journey accomplishes a lot of what the 7-point story structure was doing and what the Fitchian curve was doing. The fourth thing that I find super helpful about the hero's journey is temptation. The hero must be tempted to step away from their mission. There must be some sort of voice trying to lure them away. It could be their own faults, it could be an injury, it could be a love interest, but they have to consider whether they should abandon this quest. And the fifth thing I find super helpful about the hero's journey is that it's very character-centric. So many of these stages are just about developing a certain character. There's a stage for the mentor. There's a stage for an authority figure. There's a stage that ensures you have character change. It's just so wise to have a story structure that doesn't ignore the huge role that characters play in the evolution of your story. And let's talk about number 6, which I think is probably the most misunderstood aspect of the hero's journey. It's called Rescue from Without. Rescue from Without happens at the climax of your novel. And the danger is writers think like, oh, this means a deus ex machina. Something comes in and solves the problem. Ooh, do not write it like that. Please don't use it like that. Rescue from Without is better described as assistance that minor characters give your hero as your hero accomplishes the main effort of solving the main problem in the climax. 2 quick examples. For instance, in Lord of the Rings, when Gondor is losing against Mordor, what do you see? All the riders of Rohan coming in to save the day. But remember, they are just assisting the fighters that are already there. They don't do all of the work. Or let's look at a classic romance movie like Notting Hill, where we have Spike, who is a minor character, this scruffy sort of quirky roommate. What he does is he gets out and stops traffic so that Hugh Grant can get to the press conference and woo Julia Roberts. So whatever your climax is, make sure that your minor characters have a role to play in helping the hero accomplish their mission. Please comment below if you disagree with my ranking. I am, always open to debate. And also comment below if I didn't mention your favorite story structure. I'd love to hear what it is. And lastly, check out the links in the description to my novel course and Bookfox Academy. Happy writing.